Hi, everybody. It's Jim Ostrowski back with the Liberty Moving podcast. I'm doing this series instead of reporting on the daily disasters of the Biden administration. I'm doing a series called Dr. Ostrowski's Political Class. I'm going through chapter by chapter on with all of my, starting with book one, which is the book you see behind me. And actually, I think this might be my 20th podcast. So please subscribe and put me on alerts. And if you want to support my work as the most experienced political operative in the Liberty movement, buy my books on Amazon. I don't ask for donations. There's not even any way to get me a donation on the website I'm working on. It says we don't accept donations. I thought people would get a kick out of that and say, well, that's kind of cool. So still working out some of the kinks in the studio. I noticed a little bit of glare, but we'll get that straightened out. I'm plunging into this thing. I'm not waiting for the perfect studio situation before I get started. So I'm on chapter 3 of Political Class Dismissed. It's a very long chapter about the decline of Buffalo, using Buffalo as kind of a case study for what happens when government gets too big over time. And so I was talking about political machines in the last episode. So I'm going to pick up from there and talk a little bit about reformers and the phenomenon of reform. So basically, reformers usually lose because the machine monetizes their control of the state. They're more disciplined. They have more people. But occasionally the reformers win, and when they get into office, they turn into hacks, because the real problem is progressive big government, and the reformers tend to be progressives. They don't want to admit that progressivism is a failure by saying, wow, these programs we've started, none of them work. Instead of recognizing that it's their failed ideology, they just recycle the same error over and over again. And that the reason for this is all explained in my book, Progressivism, which we'll get into later on in the series. And both parties are progressive in the sense that they favor big government programs. And the Republican Party is a giant hoax and a fraud. They haven't eliminated a single major progressive program since Woodrow Wilson, to the best of my knowledge. If I'm wrong, let me know. I've tried to find one. Job training was the closest one, but they just recycle one failed program into another department and call it something else. So it's important to understand that the reason why why reformers against the big government machine always fail is because they're stuck in an ideology called progressivism, which is explained in I think it was my 4th book. So also I talk in Political Class Dismissed about why government grows. Government basically grows all the time, unless, as Robert Higgs pointed out in Crisis in Leviathan, there's a very strong ideological opposition to it, which there was for a long time after the Jeffersonians took power in 1800. And really, even Grover Cleveland was kind of a Jeffersonian. Not kind of, he really was a Jeffersonian. And he held firm on government growth. But when the progressive era came along, you got an ideology that favors government growth inherently. And then the natural tendency of government is to grow. So ever since the progressive era, government's been getting bigger and bigger and bigger all the time, sometimes faster than other times, often driven by a crisis. And you see that in the last year, of course. We have this crisis, and government's gotten gigantic. So it's important to understand that the government, by its nature, grows all the time. While you're sleeping, it's growing. So it's constantly growing. And this is key to understanding Buffalo, because Buffalo was a leading industrial city around 1900, major cultural center, actually. Beautiful architecture, beautiful buildings, beautiful parks. But as government grew over time, Buffalo declined and then started to stagnate. And that's all talked about in the book. So as government grows, there are certain natural consequences of that. there's natural consequences of that, and they include people get poorer. But ironically, the poorer people are, the more they demand the government do something about it, because they just, they haven't studied under Rothbard, Mises, and so on. They don't understand these dynamics. So they just keep calling for bigger and bigger government. As government grows, the machine gets stronger. The machine is always pushing for bigger government growth, so it can has more patronage jobs, more power to hand out favors to business, to get donations, to recycle the donations into support for candidates, so that the machine candidates win. They win like 90% of the time. And then when a reformer occasionally wins, they get sucked into the vortex of being a machine hack. I have a aphorism: all reformers turn into hacks. Believe me, I've been watching it happen for 40 or 50 years. So now, even though big government is an obvious failure from any scientific or from the point of view of facts, evidence, logic, just like common sense observation, big government does remain popular. And I talk about some of the reasons in chapter 3. The big one is the state control over education. Now, that's an issue I got into in my I think it's my second book, Government Schools Are Bad for Your Kids. We're going to go through that book chapter by chapter. One of the main functions of government schools is to brainwash young people into loving big government. And guess what? It succeeded. And I've been warning the movement for years. This has to be our key issue. Nobody ever listens to me. I'm right 90% of the time, but nobody ever listens to me. It's pretty funny. Get a kick out of it. You can only laugh. If you don't laugh, you're going to cry. So why is big government so popular? Even though it obviously does not work. One, progressive big government allows people to spend other people's money without feeling guilty about it. Two, this notion of we're taxing the rich and redistributing their money, a way that satisfies a deep-seated human emotion of envy. People don't want to admit they're envious. I think, as Rand said, the hatred of the good for being good. Nobody wants to admit that they're envious, but so they say, well, I'm in favor of justice. Well, no, you're just an envious loser, jealous of people who are successful and you're not. Grow up, leftist. Sorry. Finally, it's funny going back to Political Class Dismissed, which is 2004. I didn't quite get the scam of the progressive ideology. In fact, I wasn't even using the word progressive that much. I was kind of using liberalism. I was using socialism. I really should have been using the term progressivism. It just shows you how words are really important. But this notion that big government promises to solve all the difficult problems of life and offers people this sort of fake sense of control over their life. It's kind of a substitute for religion. So the theories I later developed in great detail in progressivism, there's sort of an early version of that theory in Political Class Dismissed. Next part of the book, and again, these podcasts in this study guide and in the outline, there's no substitute for reading the book. I did a tremendous amount of research. If you're interested in Buffalo, if you're interested in any Rust Belt city, or if you're interested in your city and what it's going to look like 10, 20 years from now, read the book. It has all the details in it, all the war stories, all the factoids. And so basically, but in a nutshell, government grew. It eventually sucks. As government grows, it consumes more resources that would otherwise go into private sector investment. So there's less money available for capital investment. So what happens? You get the Bethlehem steel plant, and there's billions of dollars, whatever, invested in it. And then when that depreciates, the management has a choice. Well, we can go somewhere else. We can go to some third world country. We can go to the South, which has better union deregulation, or we can stay here and continue to get the blood sucked out of us by this greedy political class of Buffalo. And I think at one point, Bethlehem was paying 60% of the property taxes of the very corrupt city of Lackawanna, which had all sorts of do-nothing jobs and no-show jobs and so on. So basically, as businesses depreciated their capital, they just checked out of Buffalo. And this started happening, I don't know, probably late 60s, early 70s. And that's basically why Buffalo declined. All the details are in the book, and it's really pretty interesting. So in the book, I say, well, instead of grasping, well, wow, big government's killing Buffalo, they can't admit that, A, because they're progressives and they love big government. It's the solution to all your problems. But B, like, this is how they're making their money. They're work for the government, they're in the machine, whatever. So they can never really admit what the truth is as I explain in my book. So they come up with all sorts of gimmicks, and they're very creative about it to keep the political class in power without the people revolting. And those include subsidies from Albany and Washington. And the question about, the issue with subsidies is, why does Buffalo have to be subsidized? Buffalo is one of the leading industrial cities on earth, like in 1900. Why is Buffalo suddenly having to be subsidized by other areas? Instead of asking other areas to subsidize Buffalo, shouldn't we have figured out what those areas were doing and do what they're doing so that we have the excess money to subsidize other areas? You see what I'm saying? I mean, it's almost like a Borscht Belt comedian here. It's so silly. All this stuff is so stupid. I mean, the Buffalo political class, they're very good at manipulating people, getting power, lying, winning elections, getting signatures, knocking opponents off in court. But these people are really very dumb people. And that's why they need to be political hacks, because they can't pound pavement, hit the street, and get a job in the marketplace. So they built this pork barrel projects, corporate welfare, tax breaks. I could do a show about each one of these things. They built a $600 million subway line that went from nowhere to nowhere because of this fallacy of, that pork barrel projects help the economy. They do not. Special tax breaks, also just outright cash grants to corporations, which we challenged in court and lost, even though we were, of course, 100% right. So a lot of corruption there. A lot of the people that I sued in court went to jail. I don't want to mention the names. I'm going to accidentally misidentify somebody, gets sued for defamation. I don't even believe in defamation suits. They're stupid. So a lot of these guys went to jail for the corruption. Why is there corruption? Because once that tax money leaves your pocket, there's no way in economic theory or in the theory of justice to figure out how it should be spent. So these people have billions of dollars to hand out. How are they going to hand it out? They default to rational self-interest. I'm going to hand this money out in such a way that it improves my life. I'm going to get a bribe, or I'm going to hand it to friends or whatever. So corruption's inherent in the GD system. Can't be fixed. It can't be reformed. Okay? Learn these points. It took me 50 years to learn this stuff. Learn this stuff. Reform doesn't work. What works is getting rid of the damn program in the first place. Unions. Buffalo's a big union town. Well, that's one of the reasons it declined, because what do unions do? Unions admit this themselves, and so they really can't deny it. Unions raise the wages of their own members, right? Union people, you all agree with me, right? You tout that. That's why you. But that reduces the wages of all non-union workers and hurts everybody else in society. Consumers, businesses, all non-union workers. Unions have a very deleterious effect on the economy. And also, the mafia is always big in Buffalo. Well, why? Well, I happen to know a little bit about that. So I published a book on the subject. And this is discussed in the book. The mafia was created by a commission, and one of the commission members, I think it was in 1931, created the mafia, and he was from Buffalo. I mean, not the Western New York area. He ran Buffalo's, but he lived in Niagara County. So the mafia's, a lot of the mafia's power is based on their control of unions. I won't get into the details. It's all in the book. So that's discussed in the book too. So, one of the things I didn't have in my notes here is that the excuses. And it's again, instead of admitting Buffalo was destroyed by big government, this is so effing obvious. They come up with all these gimmicks, and all the various excuses and gimmicks are discussed in the book. Well, the St. Lawrence Seaway closed, or this, that, and the other thing. All the excuses are refuted in the book. I'm going to be really short today, so maybe I should keep talking. So, to sum up this portion of the book, the reason why I talked about Buffalo, and I said this in the book, Buffalo is a preview of coming attractions. And since 2004, when I said, look, why? Because divide the country into three parts. The West is new. The South is in the sense that it was sort of wiped out by the Civil War, and they had to reconstruct a political economic system down there, is relatively new. Buffalo's been around since 1812. So the older polity is, the longer the political class and the political machine has to get its control over the levers of power and really start milking it. So you might live in an area, you might say, well, that won't happen to us. Yes, it will. Because the older your situation, the older your political arrangement is, the worse it's going to get. Government's going to grow. And in fact, the Buffalo disease, as I predicted basically in the book, has gone national. The nation is now, I have Buffalo declining starting in about the early 60s. And really, I think Buffalo has been in a state of decline ever since, and continuing, although I don't keep close tabs of the statistics. I do live here, and I see the decline. So I have the United States really starting to decline in the last couple of decades, following the path of Buffalo. So Buffalo is a preview of coming attractions, folks. That's why I think the book is really interesting, whether you live in Buffalo or not. So that's about all I have. There is well, I'll skip it for the next time. I was going to tell a little anecdote about a myth that people think about Buffalo, but we'll get into that another time. I don't want to get too off track. So we're going to continue. I think the next section in the book will be judicial politics. And this led me off onto quite a bit of a, I don't want to say tangent, but started talking about the courts. And, I talked a lot about, what do courts, how do courts function? Do they do justice? Can they do justice? Why do people think they can do justice? So I'm going to get into that. In fact, one of my final books is going to pursue that theme more in the next, when that book comes out. But in the next installment of this series, Dr. Ostrowski's Political Class, I'm going to talk about judicial politics in Buffalo. It should be pretty interesting. I know a little bit about that subject, having been a lawyer for 37 years. And my father is depicted on the back cover, handing me the gavel. See the gavel on the front cover? You guys can figure it out. I'll tell you that whole story about the cover at some point. He was a judge for 30 years. He was a judge when I was 3 to age 33. So I think I know a little bit about this subject. So over and out for the Liberty Moving podcast and our series entitled Dr. Ostrowski's Political Class. And class is now dismissed for the day.